for now. In terms of setting the scene, this is just another of our D&I events. It's really about increasing knowledge and understanding, and overall, hopefully creating a more inclusive environment, a more inclusive employment environment. That's why we started it off, and we'll continue to cover different topic areas as we go through. So you will be aware, this is World Menopause Month. So it's another, I suppose, underrepresented group or underrepresented need that I think it's useful to talk through and increase our learning. So if I can introduce the panel, we've got people coming at things from different angles. First of all, we'll hear from Dr. Rachel Nicholson, who's a consultant gynecologist. Rachel, do you want to say hi? Just check that your microphone's working.
Yeah, hi everybody. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Rachel. And then we'll hear from Eleanor Wilkinson, who's a partner specialising in employment law with Square One Law.
Hi everyone, morning.
Hi there, Eleanor. And then finally, we'll hear from Sharon MacArthur, who's known regionally and nationally as Miss Menopause in terms of her work that she does around this particular area. So Sharon, you okay? Can you hear us all right?
Yes, morning everyone.
Great, excellent. Okay, well, Rachel, if I can turn things over to you. I think Rachel's going to go through some slides. So Rachel, do you want to see if you can boot those up?
Yeah, will do.
See if the technology works.
Okay, is that working, everybody?
Yeah, I can see that fine, Rachel.
Okay, brilliant. So thanks everybody for inviting me along to do this talk today. So my name's Dr. Nicholson. I'm a gynecology doctor. So after medical school, we do foundation training in various topics, and then we later choose our specialist subjects. So I've chosen to do obstetrics and gynecology. I'm in my latter stages of training and soon to be a consultant. And so I hope I can give you some detail about the menopause and how it impacts the workplace. And I hope, yeah, probably a lot of new information for a lot of you. So this is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So a bit about terminology, about what menopause means, what happens when our bodies go through an estrogen deficiency state in the short, medium and long term, and then a little bit about some benefits of HRT. So this picture just helps to demonstrate a lot of symptoms that women feel. And so a lot of the physical symptoms can include pain, urinary, periods, dry and sleep. And a lot of the psychological symptoms are there as well. So tiredness, mood, low, swings, attacks and irritable. So I'm afraid I will use a lot of gynecology words, vagina, bleeding, uterus, and I hope that doesn't make everybody feel uncomfortable, but ultimately it's just about making those words normal. You should be able to discuss things like that, and I discuss them every day with women. So for me, it's my normal language. So sadly, a lot of the symptoms that women face, both physically and psychologically, lead to a change in their quality of life. And this is what women face in the workplace. And so just to start, this picture helps to demonstrate along years and years ago how women are depicted in the menopause. Like, look at they're distressed, they're crying, they're sad. And the word hysteria originates from the Greek word for uterus, which is hystera. And way back in the 1900s, the Egyptian used to attribute behavioural disturbances to women, to having a wandering uterus. And they later dubbed the word as hysteria. And to treat hysteria, the Egyptian doctors prescribed all sorts of funny medications, such as smells that they can swallow, on patients' vulvas, to encourage the uterus to return to its proper position, which just seems so bizarre. And the Romans used to accredit hysteria to a disease of the womb or a disruption of the reproductive cycle, such as menopause. So even way back when, menopause had a lot of negative ideas surrounding it. So what is the menopause? So menopause marks the end of a declining ovarian function. So it is an estrogen deficient state. It affects the quality of life physically and emotionally for women, and can impact their family, their work, and their social life. And it's quite sad that 3 out of 4 women have symptoms that affect both their home and their work life. It impacts a woman's ability to function at work, their productivity, how mentally engaged they feel at work. So the average age for menopause in the UK is 51. And so age 51, women may be at the peak of their careers. But are they going through the menopause? Is it stress at home? Is it stress at work? So there's a lot to think about. This survey was carried out by Newson Health about women's experience of menopause. And they found that 9 out of 10 women, the menopause had a negative impact on their work. 9% had a disciplinary process due to poor performance. Half women had time off work due to their symptoms. Half women reduced their working hours. And about a third of women considered quitting their job altogether. But what is misunderstood about menopause is it can be misdiagnosed as a depressive state. And so women may wrongly be offered antidepressants when in fact they should be offered HRT. So postmenopausal women count for 20% of the UK population. And so the culture of not talking about menopause means that a lot of women don't feel comfortable talking about their symptoms with their managers or their colleagues. And sadly, research has shown that menopausal women feel less engaged, they have a lower level of commitment, they feel less satisfied, and they have a greater intention to quit their job. So just a bit of terminology and epidemiology. So what is the menopause? Menopause is the last menstrual period. So you can only diagnose that 12 months after a woman has had no bleeding. The climacteric is the phase surrounding the menopause and is also known as the perimenopause. And this is a time from when the ovaries start to fail. So when women start to have irregular periods and then they get symptoms of the menopause, such as hot flushes. And that lasts until 12 months after the last period. So the postmenopause is the time after complete cessation of periods, which can only be known with certainty after 12 months of amenorrhea, which is there's no periods. Women can experience this earlier. So if they're under 45, that's called an early menopause. And if it is before women are 40, it is classed as a premature ovarian insufficiency. And this may be due to a number of reasons, such as surgery. So if they've had their ovaries removed, their uterus removed, if they've had radiotherapy or chemotherapy for some sort of cancer. So a lot of you might not have seen what a uterus looks like. And so the picture on the right shows a premenopausal uterus. So it's about the size of your fist. And so you can see the picture on the left is what happens to the uterus after the menopause. So it shrinks, it gets smaller. There's less estrogen, there's less muscle, there's less vascularity and blood flow. And that doesn't just happen to the uterus, it happens in the vagina and it happens to the bladder as well. So it's quite nice to see the change. So what happens when women go through an estrogen deficiency state? Well, firstly, their periods stopped, but that doesn't tend to be the biggest problem that women face. The biggest problem that women face is the vasomotor symptoms, and these are the hot flushes and the night sweats, which are the predominant symptom that women and men think women suffer when they're going through the menopause. And that's because that affects 7 to 80% of women. That can last an average about 7 years, but sadly for 4 out of 10 women, that can last up to 14 years. So that's a huge, huge time frame. But it doesn't just affect those symptoms. Women can get mood swings, panic attacks, depression. They can become forgetful, and they have difficulty concentrating and headaches. Later, women can experience other symptoms, and this is predominantly with symptoms due to the estrogen deficiency state, such as vaginal dryness. They can get dyspareunia, which means painful intercourse, and they get reduced libido, which is a reduced sex drive. And that is often because of pain associated with sex and because the vagina is dry. So if you improve those symptoms, then that largely improves women's sex lives and drive. As the picture showed from the uterus, that similar things happen in the bladder. And so women can get recurrent urinary tract infections. And they can also get stress and urge urinary incontinence. So stress incontinence is when a woman coughs, sneezes, laughs, does exercise, and they leak urine. And urge urinary incontinence means when women are desperate to go to the toilet, they've got a key in the door, but they can't quite make it in time. And these are symptoms that sadly a lot of women suffer, but something can be done about it with quite easy fixes. So if you are suffering these symptoms, please do see somebody and access help. It doesn't just affect the vagina though, it affects the rest of the body. So women get thin skin, they get hair loss, broken nails, and general aches and pains. So it is a pretty miserable state of play for a lot of women. Long term then, this mainly affects other areas in the body. So women are less able to conserve their collagen, and so they can get brittle bones, osteoporosis, broken nails. They're less able to maintain healthy endothelium, and so that means that women suffer high blood pressure, atherosclerosis, which is a clogging of arteries, and so women can get coronary heart disease. And what is also interesting is that women are less able to synthesize neurotransmitters. And so neurotransmitters in the brain, such as acetylcholine, serotonin, and dopamine. And so this is why women experience problems with cognition, with their memory and understanding, problems with low moods, irritability, and insomnia. So it isn't women just making up these symptoms. There's a medical reason why these things happen. So what can be done? Lots of things can be done to improve women's quality of life by improving the symptoms that they suffer. And that's with medications such as HRT, but it can just be with simple things. So using thin clothes, using a fan to control vasomotor symptoms when they're hot, and having flushes. By improving those symptoms, women's sleep improves, and that would clearly have a huge impact on their mood. All these things, though, can be improved with HRT. So by taking estrogen to change that estrogen deficiency state, then these symptoms can improve. Genitourinary symptoms I discussed with problems in the vagina, the bladder, can be improved with vaginal estrogen. And so that's just a little bit of cream, often just the tip of your finger, on the vagina every night. And that really helps to improve those incontinence symptoms, those urinary tract symptoms, and vaginal dryness. And when women suffer those symptoms, it also impacts their mood. So by improving symptoms, you're not just improving the dryness in the vagina, you're improving the overall well-being of the woman. So that's all I've got to talk about today. Thank you for listening, and I do welcome any questions. I think that will probably be after the other speakers have done that.
Yeah, I think we're going to do that, Rachel. I think we'll do it at the end. But thanks for that. That was really comprehensive. You know, a lot of you on the session will have noticed I'm a man, and that's been quite educational for me. and that's part of the reason for this session, is just increasing understanding. And I would venture that there might have been also some added facts in there for all of us. So thanks for that, Rachel. You can relax now. And
probably not every day on a business chat you talk about vaginas and uteruses and these.
yeah, not very often, but yes. But I mean, and Sharon will talk about this later on. It's easy to kind of smirk around all this, the terminology, but we shouldn't. And it's about us increasing our understanding. So, Eleanor, if we move on to your presentation now, I think you're going to do it just spoken rather than using slides. Is that right?
Slides, yeah, that's right. Hi everyone, thank you.
Great. Okay. Yeah, so it'd be interesting to hear, your viewpoint from a legal perspective.
Yeah, exactly. So from, as Scott said at the outset, I'm a partner in the employment team at Square One Law, and we support businesses regionally and nationally, and I've certainly seen this increased on our clients' agendas as being something that they want more information about, either because it's policies or training for staff, but also to the other end of the scale, an increased number of tribunal claims referencing the menopause. So it is something really topical. But I think what a lot of businesses struggle with is, well, why do we really need to address it now if they haven't got a tribunal claim or a pressing urge to deal with it? But the reality is that businesses have a different composition of their workforce than they have done historically. It was only in the last 50 years that we had the introduction of legislation that prevented employers dismissing staff when they got married or when they had a baby. And so we now have a completely different dynamic within the workplace, more women in work later in life than ever before. And so more of that workforce will be experiencing symptoms of the menopause than businesses have ever before had to deal with. And realizing the importance of recruiting and retaining skilled and experienced workers. And, with obligations with regards to gender pay reporting and closing those gender pay disparities, retaining skilled and experienced staff is crucial in ensuring that those disparities are reduced. And increasingly people are asking, whether it be an interview or just generally in the course of their employment, well, what are you doing? What proactive steps are you taking, both to narrow pay disparity, but also to support women more generally? And we've even had queries about, well, what is your policy? What are you doing to support women? And so it's increasingly important for businesses to think about it. We've had a government inquiry, it's just recently closed, looking at what policies and practices businesses can put in place to better support those experiencing symptoms of the menopause. We may see legislative changes coming through. But at the moment, there is and remains a legal risk for businesses to think about as well. And often we look at the physical aspects of the working environment and what changes can be made in terms of temperature, in terms of uniforms and things like that. But it's also really important to turn it around and think about, well, what about the impact of the symptoms on work and the risk that it can pose from an employee who's really struggling with sleep? Not only in terms of the support you need to be providing to those employees, but also the risk it can pose to the business. And from my perspective, and looking and working with businesses at how they can better protect themselves and mitigate against risk, looking at those root causes of risk and analysing how they can be developed really supports the business from a different angle. And ultimately, until women feel comfortable to raise these issues, we won't really address them, and we won't get to the bottom of them and allow those issues to be dealt with and the risks to be mitigated. From a legal perspective, this first came across my desk about 3 years ago, and I had my first case involving somebody who was struggling with symptoms of the menopause. And this was a really senior executive. I don't commonly deal with employees and act for employers, but this was a rare instance where I was asked to, and it was a senior executive risen through the ranks to the top of her game, but had made a mistake and ultimately had disciplinary proceedings commenced in relation to her. And she hadn't felt comfortable, neither during her working life, nor in the sort of initial investigation stage, to raise this as an issue that she'd been really struggling with. And she'd felt absolutely desperate at times, but just hadn't felt like she was in a working environment where she could raise it. Ultimately raised it at the disciplinary stage when, that it was really important that she did do that. And the employer took the view that because it hadn't been raised earlier, that was suggestive of her lying and making that up simply to try and save her job, which just demonstrates a lack of perception of just how difficult it is for women to raise these issues and to feel comfortable to raise them, both during the work and even in a disciplinary process. And ultimately they just disregarded and failed to grapple with the issue. And ended up, it didn't go all the way through. It rumbled on for a long time, but was ultimately resolved. Because I think for that business, they recognised that there was a huge reputational issue for them. Their main demographic of their customer base were women who would all, have gone through menopausal symptoms, and to have a big case dealing with that would have, have huge ramifications for them. So that was the first case that I dealt with, but it is difficult to run a tribunal claim in relation to this successfully. Anybody can bring any claim, but a successful one, and they tend to range on relation to disability, in relation to age, in relation to sex claims, as well as potentially linked to unfair dismissal. And with a disability discrimination claim, for example, the first hurdle you have to get over is establishing that actually these symptoms are sufficient to meet the statutory criteria of what constitutes a disability. So that's, is it a physical or mental impairment? Is it substantial? Does it have a long-term adverse effect on that employee's ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities? And we have had cases coming through that establish and have confirmed that can be the case in relation to the menopause. But we had a case that came through the Employment Appeal Tribunal only a few weeks ago, and there are very few at EAT level dealing with the menopause. But it came through earlier this month, where the tribunal at first instance had dismissed the notion that this employee was disabled, despite the evidence that she presented at tribunal of all the symptoms that she was suffering and the effect that this was having on her normal day-to-day life. And she then had to appeal. The appeal essentially said, we can't understand the tribunal's rationale for not accepting that as being a disability in the face of the evidence that was presented, having not specifically rejected that evidence. And so it's been remitted back to another tribunal. And although she sort of succeeded at appeal, ultimately it just demonstrates the high threshold and the difficulties that employees have to go through to get over that initial hurdle. And even once you've gone through that and established that it is a potential disability, you've also got the issue of knowledge. And to what extent does the employer know about this, and whether they have the sufficient requisite knowledge to be held accountable? And we've seen, repeatedly that there isn't that willingness to share, or certainly to underreport potentially.
Eleanor, would you mind if I just came in at that point? We had a question from the floor, really, from Kate Simpson, just saying, is there any good news, really, and what level of, I suppose, acceptance or to what extent are employers starting to understand the need in this area?
Well, I think what comes through the case authorities is, so far, there are employers making great steps, and we're working with a lot who are really taking positive, proactive steps to train. And I think that's something that comes through a lot of the case authorities in relation to disability, in relation to sex, is this failure to engage is where the risk arises. And so a lot of the cases are about businesses who just don't engage with it, whether it's in relation to performance, whether it's in relation to disciplinaries. They just don't, the staff don't have the training, they don't have the knowledge, the understanding, not only of the menopause or the symptoms, but also the effect that it can have on performance, on mistakes that are made. And that's why I say, it's about looking at how this can impact on the working environment, because that's where the biggest risk comes from. And there are companies who are taking great steps in that regard, and who are doing training, and who are making sure their workforce are taking steps. And that's really, really positive to see. But the cases that are coming through are those businesses who are lagging behind, who aren't dealing with it, and whose managers come across disciplinaries, and who think that because their wife's been through the menopause, or their HR advisor who's supporting on it has been through the menopause, that they are leading experts. And what we've seen from Rachel is that actually this affects people in such different ways, and people have such different experiences, that it's not a one size fits all. And it's not a case of we can draw necessarily any conclusions from our own experiences. And it's about engaging with it. And one of the key cases in relation to sex discrimination was that the business didn't even follow its own performance management process. And it was direct sex discrimination because had a male raised health issues at a performance level, they would have gone off to do further medical investigations. But in that case, they disregarded it out of hand, didn't engage with it as an issue, because they used their own experiences to make certain assumptions. Whereas, had it been a male raising these issues, they would have done. And so, training the staff who have to deal with disciplinaries, who are managing staff in that position, or even just dealing with them. And I think the other element, without going on to it in too much detail, but the other element that comes through the tribunal cases is this issue that it's kind of an area that's fair game for jokes and comments to be made. And perhaps because it's not a protected characteristic, or not defined and as readily accessible in terms of claims, is that it becomes this sort of fair game ground for jokes, for comments, for sort of suggestion that that's all acceptable. And again, that comes through the tribunals cases that we've got in harassment, whether it be by relation to sex, age, or disability, that these comments are sort of acceptable. And it was only a few years ago we had the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England describing the UK's economy as menopausal, to describe it as being past its peak. And that's only if that's people in really leading positions using this descriptive word. And that comes through the cases as well. And so from my perspective, in terms of businesses and reducing risk, it is about awareness and about training and ensuring that people have that understanding.
I don't want to steal Sharon's thunder, because she'll be chomping at the bit.
Go and steal my thunder.
But I did see a stat somewhere that said that only 3% of employers have really addressed issues around the menopause thus far. But and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and I think, but it comes in, it's different, and perhaps something to talk about as well as policies, and whether we should have a compulsory menopause policy. But so many businesses would have one, shove it in the cupboard, and never look at it again. That doesn't get to the root of the problem. It's about encouraging people to talk about it.
And it's not just about compliance. It's about the positive effects of catering for and allowing for the needs of women going through the menopause. That's, and I'm sure we'll go on to talk about that in more detail. So Eleanor, thanks for that. Again, from a different perspective, but really interesting again. And employers, getting into courtrooms and things is a sign of things going wrong, really, isn't it? But it's also a sign that employers need to take it seriously. So thanks, Eleanor. So to look at things from a different perspective, Sharon, you've been waiting a long time. So can I turn things over to you? I'll let you do your own introduction.
Okay, well, I just want to say about the menopause, it's the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? Keeps on giving and giving. So I often say to people, if I have the opportunity, I might want to come back as an indoor cat. But there you go, that's just me. But let me tell I set up this menopause nearly 4 years ago now. And if you told me I was going to get passionately involved with the menopause, I would have said, don't be ridiculous. That's got nothing to do with me in my life. I'm not medically trained. I don't pretend or profess to be. But through my own lived experience, I set up this menopause because I was really, really angry because I didn't know about menopause, and that was only 5 years ago. And I used to be a senior leader in a FTSE 100 company, and I thought I knew a lot of things about a lot of things. And yet when somebody, I have to say, dared to say to me, Sharon, do you not think you could be menopausal? I was absolutely disgusted, because I was like, I'm far too young for that. So to cut a long story short, I did a lot of research, a lot of investigation. There was a couple of key catalysts that led me down this route because of the level of ignorance about this subject matter. And my friends and peers of mine didn't know about menopause either. And I think that's the first thing that I want to say to you as employers. Don't assume that we all know what this menopause thing is. There's been a lot more chat about it recently, but many women, well, everybody really is in the same boat. So I think it's interesting when you know, Scott was going, oh, men are coming on this call. My mission is to educate everybody, because menopause might have physically and mentally happened to me. But what I would say is, if you've been in my orbit, whether you're a colleague, a friend, or a family member, you would have been impacted with my menopause at its very, very worst. So it's really, really important that we get this idea that it's no longer for women of a certain age. I'm almost like, oh, I can't believe that we're still hearing those terms. But quite often I'll rock up to organisations that say, Sharon, yeah, we want you to educate our women of a certain age. And I'm like, this has got to stop. So we've got to educate everybody, and we've got to understand that most people are coming from a level of knowledge of often practically zero. So they don't know anything. They haven't got a clue. That's what's happening to their minds and their bodies as menopause related. So the saddest things that women say to me on a daily basis are this, is, I thought I had early onset Alzheimer's. That is the most common thing that women say. And that's incredibly sad, isn't it? And then the other ridiculous thing that women say to me from a workplace point of view is, Sharon, I felt so alone. I felt so isolated that I couldn't speak to anyone. What I'm about to say is 100% of reproducing females, whether you like it or not, are going to go through the life event known as menopause. So for any younger people on the call today, I'm just saying, coming to a body near you, whether you like it or not. So there's no escape. You can't go, you can't buy a golden ticket to opt out of the magical menopause. It can't be done. So it's really, really important that when people say to me, what's the best plan? Well, the best plan is, for me, is to educate. Assume nothing. So did anyone have what I can only describe as the girl chat at school? Now, Scott, I know we've talked about this. Now, in my school, you wouldn't have known about the girl chat because all the boys were sent out to play football. And that was gorgeous for them. We were all herded as 10 and 11-year-olds into the big hall. And then I was told I was going to bleed every month for over 30 years. I was like, oh, is this normal? And then I was shown something horrific called a Dr. White's belt, which was absolutely more terrifying than being told I was going to bleed every month for 30 years. But the point being is, the biggest stressor I had at age 10 and 11 was, what was I going to wear at the school disco? And was I going to get my French homework done on time? And now, because of brilliant initiatives in the 21st century, gender pay gap, D&I initiatives, mental health and well-being is a huge hot topic, and quite rightly so. And we've got women who are the main wage earners in their families, single parent families. We're being encouraged, aren't we, to take on more and more accountability. Absolutely the right thing to do. And yet, this life event called menopause comes along for most women, mostly in their 40s, and makes them think they have early onset Alzheimer's. So I shouldn't be holding education sessions up and down the UK where I have senior women bursting into tears. It's happened 3 times in 6 months. The first time I thought, Sharon, what have you done? Have you upset this person? And the woman spoke up, and they've all said the same thing. These are senior women in their organisations who only at this point that we were talking about this in a safe space, that they felt able to share about their own menopause story without fear of judgment or retribution. And this has just got to stop. It's outrageous. So, one of the most expensive things we have to do, isn't it, is recruit and then retain our talent. And the talent is walking out of the door currently out of ignorance, because women are putting 2 and 2 together and coming up with 46. So Ellen has kind of touched upon it for me. So you can go and write, if you wish, a menopause policy. You can go and get your hands on them for free. CIPD do menopause policies. Google it. You can find menopause policies. But what I'll say is, the menopause policy, or any policy, is only as good as the human that looks at it. And so bad behaviour is bad behaviour, and people do what they do. My guidance is, maybe, is there a better opportunity to take what you currently have and look at your current policies with a menopause lens, for example. So I know that people on this call today will have beautiful policies, for example, for things like pregnancy. So from a disclosure of pregnancy in the last 20, 30 years, look how far we've come. If someone discloses a pregnancy, we don't have that equivalent for women going through the menopause. And yet 100% of reproducing females may not be parents, but they will go through the menopause. So we have a disparity already. So what I'm saying is, could you take your current policies like pregnancy, for example? The most ridiculous thing I ever heard, it was about 3 years ago now. So I'm walking it, I'm striding through the office to go to this, in the organisation. And a woman came running up to me, she went, Sharon, I think I'm going through the menopause. And I went, all right, okay. She went, so I've asked for a fan. And I said, well, okay, that doesn't sound unreasonable. She said, but the policy says I can only have one if I'm pregnant. I mean, come on, we've got to stop this ridiculous silo thinking. So she said, well, I've asked, can I bring my own in? And they've said, no, because it's not pack tested. So I'm hoping we're coming further than that. But these things are still happening. So use what you already have and get your leaders and from yourselves from an HR perspective, look at maybe your current policies and think about menopause through a menopause lens. So I always say it should be no cost, low cost solutions really should help you to manage menopause in the workplace. So educate. That's the first one. Things like I say, disclosure. So I disclose my menopause to you. It's already been said, but how I say it is everyone will have a menopause like themselves. You will have a menopause entirely like you. It might be similar to friends, family and colleagues, but it won't be the same. And that's what makes it incredibly difficult, because what might work for me, and I get super enthusiastic about, might never work for you. So we become a live living experiment really throughout our menopause until we find the thing that works for us. So I've worked with organisations who've done things like, for example, they've checked out what's in their bathrooms, what vending machines they have. Now, let me tell you, you might have vending machines in your organisations now, but often what they're going to vend are things like this, which if you're having a heavy period, they are neither use nor ornament. So some organisations don't even have vending machines. So I was working with a group of people who were non-managers. They were women who were passionate about helping their organisation to make a difference. And they went through all of their buildings and they realised that some had vending machines, some didn't. And all they, what to do is they costed out, they got, and I'm showing the age now, Tupperware boxes. So boxes with lids on. And they came up with the idea that they should have various products in those boxes to help women who might be having heavy periods. And we also know period poverty is a thing as well, which, don't get me started on that. But the transformation in terms of the feedback and the engagement was massive. And it really cost pence. What it cost was the thought process to think through a menopause lens of what might help and encourage those women and help them if they were having a heavy period. So it's really no cost, low cost solutions. And that's the thing. And I also say, when you educate everybody, many of the women who will come along and men, some of the most profound feedback I've had has been from men who've said to me, Sharon, learning about menopause is probably going to help to save my marriage. So if you care about mental health and well-being, if you care about engagement, and if you want to be congruent and with what you do and what you say, then you cannot afford not to talk about menopause in the workplace. I'm working with, for example, elements of the NHS where the current trust I'm working with is 75% females. That's a ticking time bomb, and that's even greater in that organisation. Yet I've spent this week working with 3 manufacturing sites, all different organisations, where their gender balance, they say only 10% female. Do you know what I mean? Only. That's still a lot of humans. So we've just got to get around this idea that menopause education and learning about this life event, which remember is going to impact 100% of reproducing females, can only be a positive step and perhaps make you an employer of choice and avoid things that Ellen has talked about. Because my view is we should never get to that place. Because if we are going to intending on making menopause in the workplace business as usual, then we just will, and it'll just happen. So we should be able to say things like hand, foot, vagina, penis in a sentence, without going, we can't say that. We've all got body parts, we're all adults, and we just need to, recognize that this is a thing. Menopause is in the workplace, it's here to stay because of our aging workforce. And let's enable everybody to work through it so we can get out the other side. That's all women want. Thank you, Scott. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Sharon. I mean, it's an obvious one, really. I mean, you mentioned pregnancy there, the allowances that have been made around that. I'm thinking myself, things like adoption, people get given allowances at work if they're going through that sort of period in their life, and it affects a lot more people, but has got a lot less attention. So
yeah, the thing is, if we educate everybody, not just women of a certain age and not just line managers, if we educate everybody, most women are crying out to learn about, this life event, which will impact them. So, let's educate everybody. Let's not segregate. And when I go into organizations over the last nearly 4 years, I used to have different content depending on the audience. And now the content is the same for everybody. So let's be adult and let's give everybody the same level of information. Let's talk about, the Equality Act. Let's not hide anything, but let's just make sure that women are enabled to work through this life event and get out the other side. That's it.
We've had some comments come through. Sorry to interrupt, Sharon. Just a couple of people, Jackie and Trish, saying that their employers are embracing this, so that there's some positivity coming through. So just going on to questions, we've got a couple of questions. We're kind of running out of time, so we'll try and squeeze as many in as we can. Actually, Rachel, can I go to you on the medical side of things? I mean, there are other treatments other than HRT, and Sharon, you mentioned this the other day. Can you tell us a little bit more about the risk of cancer, or specifically breast cancer, around the use of HRT? I know that can be a barrier to people heading in that direction.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of barriers that women face accessing HRT, but you have to think of what are the benefits of HRT. And often for women, the benefits will outweigh the risks. What is advised with HRT is that you take as small a dose as possible for as short a time as possible. But if women need it for longer, then they need it for longer. There's different types of HRT, so you can take it cyclically, where you take it every day, continuously, and you can take it cyclically, where you add in progesterone. And by adding progesterone, that helps to decrease your risk of getting endometrial cancer. But things like DVT and PE are a risk factor for taking HRT. But you can decrease that risk by taking HRT with a patch rather than as a tablet. And I mentioned about the vaginal symptoms, that can be with a cream rather than a tablet. But sadly, risks do exist. So it's all about balancing that risk and benefit with your GP or with your nurse practitioner. And so sadly, there is an increased risk of breast cancer. We do know that. But if it means that women are going to be sleeping better, they're going to have a better mood, and that affects their general overall well-being, both at home and at work, then clearly the benefit outweighs the risk. So it's trying to think about that risk, but minimizing it by taking it for less time
Great. Okay, and just one other question, Eleanor, for you on the legal side of things. You mentioned a government inquiry and further legal protection. Do you think the law provides adequate protection at the moment?
In some ways, no, but I think it depends on what protection they put in place as to how effective that will be. So you can introduce it as a requirement for all businesses to have a menopause policy, but actually that doesn't get to the root of it. And similarly, making it a protected characteristic, I think in some respects puts the emphasis in the wrong place. If we're saying this is about making it something that people can talk about, can feel they can engage with their staff, or the staff can engage with them, I don't think that comes about through making it something that is legislated against in terms of potential claims that can be brought. Having said that, I do think potentially making it something that's a protected characteristic, or legislating in that regard, reduces the prospect of it being, an area that's fair game for jokes and comments to be made without appreciating the risk. But the reality is the risk is still there anyway. So, I don't know that necessarily legislating creates the emphasis on the right place, in the right place, be my view.
Yeah, yeah, and we talked before about the positive aspects of giving issues around the menopause more greater attention.
Yeah.
You know, that's got to be a focus.
Exactly. It's not beating employers with a stick. It's actually making them realise the benefits of being proactive in this area for them as well as the employees that they engage.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a couple of people having to move on to other things, other meetings. But thanks to Rachel, Sharon, and Eleanor coming at things from a different angle. I found it really interesting. Hopefully, you all did too. We'll share links to all of our panel members. If you want to get access to the recording of this, then just message us. And we'll get that out to you. But thanks for your time this morning. We will be back with another event in the near future, covering another topic area. But this has been really important, given it's Menopause Month, but also because it's really interesting. I think it doesn't get the attention that it should. So thanks again, everyone. And that's it from us. Okay, so enjoy the rest of your day.